Okay, so up next on the agenda for this episode is The Northmen. This is a pretty cool book. It was written by Thomas Froncek, it looks like. I actually didn't know that until just now because the author's name isn't printed on the front. It's only printed on the title page on the inside. Um, but this is a pretty interesting book. It's essentially like an archaeological book, if that makes sense. It kind of just talks a little bit about um, prehistoric Scandinavian, prehistoric, like the prehistoric Nords. It goes back as early as I think it goes back as early as like caveman times, to the people that were living in Scandinavia back then. Um, and then, it goes on to like the Western hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and eventually gets to the Indo-Europeans that settled in Scandinavia. Um, it's quite interesting. I chose to read this book because Survive the Jive posted this on his Twitter a while back, and I was curious about what book it is, and I figured, just why not? As someone of Norwegian descent, just why not read a little bit about the ancient history of Scandinavia? Um, there's some really really interesting things in this book. Talks a lot about the ancient rituals of the Northerners, um, such as the laying of dead bodies in pools of water, especially bogs. And it's quite interesting because a lot of bodies have been uncovered from bogs, especially in Denmark, and um, a lot around like southern Sweden. They'd often throw all sorts of things into the bogs. Like you can see here, them throwing a cow into a bog, and the bogs had this crazy capability of preserving like living or not living organisms, but like preserving the things that were thrown down there very efficiently. There's a picture in here I'm trying to find of um of an Indo-European Danish man um that was put at the bottom of a bog, um his facial features were so well preserved that you can see what kind of emotions he was experiencing at the moment of being killed and thrown down. Typically, yeah, here's the picture right here. Sorry. Yeah, it's quite fascinating if you ask me. Um, Typically, they would throw um, criminals into the bogs who were on death row essentially, because these were a part. Putting bodies at the bottom of bogs was a part of human sacrifice, right? And they typically would throw criminals who were on death row into the bogs usually after hanging them. And then in some cases, like with that picture that I just showed, they um, the archaeologists suspect that that man volunteered to be thrown down into the bog because it could be seen as an honor, and it could be seen as a way of showing your love to the spirits or to the fertility goddess that they worship. Which brings me to the next thing that I want to talk about is uh, this taught me this taught me some new and interesting things about um, the Indo-Europeans and the religion of Indo-Europeans. So one thing that's very interesting is a lot of the religious rites and religious beliefs of Scandinavians go back as early as the Western hunter-gatherers. One of those being depositing bodies into pools of water and other things. Another one being the worship of a fertility goddess, whose name we haven't been able to discover yet, probably because I have a hard time imagining that writing had been invented back then. But there seems to be a motif a singular fertility goddess throughout the prehistoric Scandinavian artifacts that we found. And this fertility goddess existed all the way from the Western hunter-gatherers all the way up to the Indo-Europeans that settled Scandinavia, which is quite interesting because the Indo-Europeans were worshiping this same fertility goddess, right? The same fertility goddess that the Western hunter-gatherers had worshipped, which to me says that because let me back up a little bit. So a lot of people theorize that there was essentially a pan-Indo-European religion, and that like the pagan religion that eventually became overtaken by Christianity was essentially just like a European manifestation of the Hindu religion, or rather, the paganism and Hinduism were just like manifestations of like the father European religion with their own like respective Eastern and Western motifs, right? Um, but I think the fact that the Indo-Europeans that settled Scandinavia, the fact that they worshipped this fertility goddess and they had the same rights as the Western hunter-gatherers, kind of dismantles this theory. And which is kind of sad, to be honest. It's quite exciting, the thought of a pan-Indo-European religion. Um, it tells me that the Indo-Europeans that settled Scandinavia did not have much of a fleshed out religion at all, if at all, if they were willing to give it up so easily for some Western hunter-gatherer religion. Um, I suppose it's possible that perhaps the religion existed. Um, yeah, it's possible that the religion existed, and then maybe just the Germanic tribes that went north just forgot about the religion somehow. I suppose it's a possibility, but I don't find it very likely. So now you might be asking yourself, so if the Indo-Europeans worshipped this fertility goddess um, if they worship this fertility goddess whose worship began with the Western hunter-gatherers, then where did the Norse gods that we all know and love come from? Um, Such as Odin and Thor and like Frey, although that whole pantheon. And the answer is they came from the Celts. It's quite interesting because the um, the uh, there's evidence showing that the Indo-Europeans of the north didn't start worshiping the god we know as Odin today um, until the Celts had started establishing very prominent trade routes with the Northmen, with the Norse. And it was at this time that along not only were they trading goods, but like they were trading religion as well. Obviously, you're going to be trading everything. You'll be trading culture, you'll be trading pottery, you'll be trading everything. Um, and the Celts, the Celts pretty much brought their religion to the North. So what we know as like Norse paganism today is really actually just it's very largely Celtic paganism rather than Norse paganism. Um, and just the simple fact uh, that the Norse and the Celts didn't share this religion for the entirety of the Northern Indo-Europeans history, it tells me that there likely wasn't a religion that had been developed by the Indo-Europeans before they split I think it was in Iran when some went west, some went whatever, right? I think it was in Iran. I find it highly unlikely that paganism and Hinduism have a shared father religion. But yeah, it's quite interesting. Um, it's quite an interesting read. I'd I definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested in like prehistory, especially European prehistory, European paganism, etc. Um, I'd probably rate it. I think I'd rate it a 7.7 out of 10 reading experience. It was quite a fun read. I really enjoyed it. and I learned some pretty cool things. Um, and yeah, I think that's really all I have to share about this book. Again, this is let me see the author's name one more time. I apologize. So it's The Northmen by Thomas Froncek. The Northmen by Thomas Froncek. I'll put the name in the camera as well, so you can look that up. Northmen by Thomas Froncek. So yeah, that's it for this book.